You want to know what the scariest part of this story is? Not that I was handed off to strangers when I was 6 years old, and not that they lied to me, told me my real parents died in a car accident, that there was nothing left of them, that I needed to move on and build a new life. The scariest part is that my real parents were alive the whole time, both of them, and they lived 100 yards away from me, across the street, in a house with white shutters and an old maple tree by the fence. A house I looked at from my window every single morning for 20 years. Every morning. 20 years. 100 yards. My name is Megan. I'm 25 years old, and I want to tell you a story that shattered everything I thought I knew about myself, about family, about people, and about how far someone will go to protect a secret, to keep the peace, to guard a decision made once and then defended like a fortress for decades. This happened 2 years ago, a regular Sunday morning in early November. I had come back to the house I grew up in. My adoptive mother had passed away a month before, and I needed to go through her things. Gray sky, bare trees, wet leaves stuck to the pavement. I was standing at the kitchen window, holding a mug of coffee, staring out at the street, simply because I didn't know where to begin. And then the woman from across the street came outside. I had seen this woman 1,000 times. Brown hair streaked with gray, a slightly tired way of moving, a garden she clearly loved. Just a neighbor from across the road. I had never thought about her for more than a second. But that morning, something caught me. Something about the way she moved, or maybe the way she tucked her hair behind her ear with this precise, almost automatic gesture that felt familiar. Too familiar. I stood there staring and couldn't figure out what wouldn't let me look away. Then she reached up toward a clothesline to hang something. Her sleeve slipped back. I saw her wrist. A birthmark. Dark brown, slightly elongated, shifted just a little to the right of center. Exactly like mine. In exactly the same spot. Identical. I set my mug down on the windowsill. Coffee spilled, ran down onto the curtain. I didn't notice. I stood there staring at this woman, and something deep inside me, some very old, very quiet part, was beginning to understand what my mind still refused to accept. Before I tell you what happened next, if stories about people who searched for the truth and found it, who kept going even when everything around them said, "Leave it alone." If those stories matter to you, please hit like and subscribe. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I genuinely want to know who's on the other side of the screen. But now, let's go all the way back to the beginning. I'm 6 years old. I'm standing in a stranger's hallway holding a plastic grocery bag that contains everything I own. 2 t-shirts, a pair of pants, a picture book I loved, and a small one-eyed teddy bear. That's it. That's my whole world in one bag. I don't remember the day they took me away. That's one of those memories the brain quietly and mercifully erases, probably to keep a small child from completely falling apart when she already has so little left to hold on to. But certain things stayed with me. The smell, for one. A stranger's house always smells different. Not bad, just not yours. A little like lavender, a little like old wood. Something faintly sour underneath that I was never able to identify in all the years I lived there. The house was neat. 2 stories, a small garden out back, a real kid's bedroom, pink curtains, a white bed frame, a bookshelf with books arranged by height. Everything was correct. Everything was foreign. Those two things coexist just fine when you're a child and you don't have a choice. You learn to live inside something correct and foreign and call it home. Dorothy met me in the hallway. She was tall, straight-backed, with hands that always seemed to know exactly what they were doing. She crouched down in front of me, so we were eye to eye, on equal ground, and said clearly and calmly, "This is your home now, Megan. I'm glad you're here." Her voice was even. Not cold, just even. Measured. Like she had rehearsed that sentence and was delivering it exactly as planned. Gerald stood behind her, slightly off to the side. Shorter, broad-shouldered, with the hands of someone who worked with them. He nodded at me and said, "Hey there, little one." And after that, he barely spoke for the rest of the evening. I came to understand that this was just how he was. Gerald occupied space quietly, like furniture, like walls, like the air in a room. He wasn't a bad man, he just wasn't really there, even when he physically was. That first night, I didn't cry. I lay in the pink room, under an unfamiliar blanket, stared at the ceiling, and thought about my mom. My real mom. The one whose face I already couldn't quite picture. Light hair, the smell of something warm and sweet, a voice that hummed softly in the evenings while she washed the dishes. That was all I had left. 3 fragments. A few days later, I worked up the nerve to ask Dorothy, "Where are my mom and dad?" She didn't flinch, didn't hesitate, didn't look away. She just looked at me calmly and said, "They were in a car accident, Megan. It happened fast. They didn't suffer. They're gone. But now you have us, and we're going to take care of you." I was 6 years old. What choice did I have but to believe her? The first few months, I was quiet. I tried not to get in the way, not to take up too much space, not to ask for more than I needed. No fussing over food, toys put away without being told, lights out when I was supposed to. Dorothy noticed. She would occasionally tell me I was a good girl, and in her system of values, that was high praise. Reserved, but real. Gerald taught me chess on weekends, wordlessly, demonstrating moves, nodding when I got it right. That was ours. Not much, but mine. Life was normal. That's the exact word. Not happy, not unhappy. Normal. There was food on the table, clean clothes, school supplies in September, presents under the tree at Christmas. My birthday was acknowledged. Nothing big, but acknowledged. Someone walked me to school, someone picked me up. Everything was as it should be. And yet, there was always this quiet, persistent emptiness underneath it all. The feeling that you're living inside someone else's story. That the set is right, the lines are right, but the role isn't yours. I couldn't put words to it then, I just felt it. I always felt it. I had no idea how literally true that was. It started when I was 12. Not with one single moment. Gradually, the way water rises without you noticing until it's already at your knees and you can't remember when you walked in. First came little oddities I explained away with anything I could find. Then came details that couldn't be explained at all. The first thing I noticed, Dorothy never let me play on that side of the street. She never said it outright. She was too smart for that. There was always a reason. The cars go too fast over there. The Harrison's dog is mean. It's always muddy after rain. I was an obedient kid and didn't push back. I accepted the explanations, moved on. But then, one day I realized there had been too many of them. The rule had always been there. It just came in a different package every time. I saw the neighbor woman often. Mid to late 30s, brown hair, a little tired. The kind of quiet way of moving that makes you think someone has learned to take up as little space as possible. She worked in her garden in the mornings sometimes sat on her porch reading. An ordinary neighbor. But every time I was outside, just in our yard, not even across the street, I had this feeling she was looking in my direction. Not staring, not making it obvious, just looking. The way you look at something very important that you're not allowed to look at directly. One afternoon, we ran into each other at the mailboxes. I was coming home from school. She was coming back from the grocery store with heavy bags. One bag gave out, tore right through the bottom, and apples rolled everywhere across the sidewalk. I didn't think about it. I just started picking them up. We ended up side by side, very close. She reached for an apple, and I saw her wrist. A birthmark. Dark, slightly elongated. I didn't think anything of it then, just noticed it and tucked it somewhere in the back of my memory. When we stood up, she looked at me. Her lower lip was trembling. Barely, but it was. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was strange, too soft, too careful, like she was carrying something fragile and afraid of dropping it. I told Dorothy about it. She listened without interrupting, then said flatly, "There's no reason to be talking to strangers on the street, Megan." I was confused. We'd just picked up some apples. But her tone made it clear that pressing further wasn't worth it. At school, it happened in the fall of 7th grade. My English teacher, young, with a short haircut, the kind of person who chose her words very deliberately, asked me to stay after class. She closed the door, sat on the edge of her desk, and said, "Megan, I want to ask you something. Not as your teacher, just person to person. Do you know the woman who lives across from your house? Brown hair, usually out in the garden in the mornings?" Something tightened in my stomach. "No," I said. "Just a neighbor. We don't really know each other." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said carefully, "It's just, you two look remarkably alike. Really strikingly similar. The shape of your face, the way your eyes are set, even this little thing you do. When you're thinking, you tilt your head just slightly to the left. She does the exact same thing. It's probably just a weird coincidence. I just thought maybe you knew each other." I walked home, turning that conversation over and over in my mind. I thought about the birthmark, about the way the woman always seemed to be looking toward our house, about the unspoken rule against crossing that street, about Dorothy's voice, the way it shifted, just slightly, every time I asked questions about my real parents. I told myself, these are coincidences. People look alike. Birthmarks happen. I'm just seeing patterns that aren't there. Sometimes we desperately want to not know something we already know, because knowing means you have to do something about it. And doing something is terrifying. At 18, I left. A university 4 hours away by bus. A different city, a different pace, different people who had absolutely no idea who I was or where I came from. Nobody looked at me with that particular mix of care and guardedness that I always read in Dorothy's eyes. Nobody knew about the adoption, about the house with white shutters across the street, about my constant sense of playing someone else's role in someone else's story. I was just Megan, a college freshman, a blank page. It felt incredible. Like setting down something heavy that you've been carrying so long, you stopped noticing the weight. and then suddenly your shoulders are free and you realize how much it had been pressing down on you. I chose psychology, not randomly, even though I told myself it was just a general interest in people. Looking back now, I understand what I was really after. I wanted to figure out how people make decisions that permanently change someone else's life, how they live with that afterward. What happens inside a person who chooses silence and maintains it for 20 years? College life was full. Dorms, the library, weekend shifts at a coffee shop, a few dollars in tips and free coffee I drank by the gallon. Real friendships, not adoptive, not conditional, just real. My first relationship. My first experience of being chosen by someone not out of obligation, but simply because they wanted to. A life that finally felt like it belonged to me. I talked to Dorothy on Sundays. Short calls, practical. How are you? Fine. Big exam next week. She answered the same way. Brief, informational. Gerald would sometimes get on the line, ask about my grades, wish me luck. We didn't grow closer, but we didn't drift further apart either. We had found our level, and we stayed there. I came home for the holidays. Christmas, summers, sometimes spring break. And every single time, I saw the neighbor. She was getting older. New lines in her face, more silver in her hair. But she still came out to her garden in the mornings. She still, I noticed with increasing certainty, sometimes looked toward our house. I wasn't imagining it anymore. It was too consistent, too deliberate to be random. One winter break, I was getting out of a cab with my suitcase when she happened to be at her mailbox. Our eyes met. She looked at me for a few seconds, and there was something in her expression I didn't have a word for. Not pity, not curiosity. Something much deeper and more painful than either of those. Then she dropped her gaze and went inside. I carried my bag in and caught myself standing at the window, watching her house. Junior year, I made my first actual attempt to look into the adoption. I told myself it was academic. We were studying identity formation in one of my classes. I found a website where you could request basic information, filled out the form, got an automated reply. To receive complete records, applicants must appear in person with valid identification. I closed the tab, filed it under later. Later stretched into 2 more years. I told myself, not yet. Finish school first. Get settled first. Wait until Dorothy is better. She was already getting sick by then, though we never talked about it directly. I kept finding reasons not to know. That's a choice too. Choosing not to know. People make it more often than they admit. The one thing I did do was write down 2 names in a notebook. Names that had appeared on the form. I put the notebook in a desk drawer in my dorm room and barely thought about it, until that November morning when everything changed. Dorothy died on a Wednesday morning in October. Her heart. The doctors said it was likely quick. She probably didn't feel anything. Gerald found her in her armchair by the window, a book open in her lap. She liked to read in the mornings while her coffee cooled. He said she looked like she had simply fallen asleep. I got there the next day. The fall light inside the house had a particular coldness and stillness to it, as if the space already knew that one of its people was gone. Gerald was sitting at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone cold a long time ago, staring at the wall. I had never seen him like that. He had always been background, quiet presence at the edges. But now you could see how enormous that quiet presence had been. How much he had leaned on her without anyone ever noticing. himself included. After the funeral, I stayed on. There were things to sort through, paperwork to deal with, 1,000 small tasks that pile up after someone dies and that are simply impossible to face alone. Gerald barely spoke. He nodded when I asked him things, occasionally disappeared into the garage for an hour or two. I didn't ask why. I worked through the rooms methodically, box by box. The living room, books, magazines, vases. The study, folders, old photographs, neatly labeled envelopes of receipts going back decades. Dorothy had been an extraordinarily organized person. Everything in its place, everything labeled, everything arranged so it could be found easily later. The bedroom was the hardest. Not because there was more stuff, there wasn't, just because it was her space. The place where she was herself, without the straight posture and the measured voice. It smelled like her perfume. On the nightstand was a photograph. Her and Gerald, young, somewhere by a lake, both of them laughing. I didn't remember ever seeing them laugh together like that. In the bottom drawer of the nightstand, under a stack of old magazines, I found an envelope. Thick, slightly yellowed at the edges. Not sealed, but folded closed in a way that felt deliberate. You had to choose to open it. On the front, my name. In her handwriting. The same neat, even script she used for grocery lists and Christmas cards. I didn't open it for 10 minutes, maybe longer. I just held it and stared at my name. She knew I'd find this. She left it here for me, on purpose. Which meant whatever was inside was something she couldn't say out loud. Then I opened it. Inside were 2 folded documents and a handwritten note that ran a page and a half. I set the documents aside. I couldn't face them yet. The note first. She didn't write the way she usually talked. No carefully chosen phrases, no measured tone. The words were plain and in places almost clumsy, like she had written and rewritten and still couldn't find what she was looking for. Megan, she wrote. If you're reading this, then I'm already gone. I went back and forth for a long time about whether to write this at all. In the end, I decided I couldn't keep silent anymore, even if the only way I could break my silence was after I was gone. Gerald and I loved you. I know we weren't perfect at it. I know warmth didn't come easily to us, that we weren't good at saying the things that mattered most. But we loved you. Each of us, in the only way we knew how. What we did, we thought it was the right thing. For everyone involved. For you most of all. I still don't know if we were right. Please forgive us if you can. And know this, you deserved more than we were able to give you. That was all. 4 paragraphs. No names. No explanations. No details. Just, we thought it was the right thing. I picked up the documents, unfolded the first one. An adoption certificate. Official form, stamps, signatures. My birth name was on it. Different from Megan. Completely different. A name I was reading for the first time in my life. A date. I was younger than I thought when it happened. The names of my biological parents. A man's name and a woman's name. 2 names that meant nothing to me. Real people, living people, somewhere in this world. And an address. I read it 3 times. Slowly, word by word, as if the letters might rearrange themselves if I looked carefully enough. Then I stood up, walked to the bedroom window, looked out at the street. The house with the white shutters was directly across from me. The maple tree by the fence, the garden, the porch. The address on the document matched that house. Every digit, I sat down on the floor, right where I was standing. The papers scattered around me. From behind the wall came the quiet creak of the garage door. Gerald was coming back inside. I didn't move. I sat on the floor of Dorothy's bedroom, looking out the window at a house I had seen every day of my life, and only now beginning to understand what I had actually been looking at. Who had been looking back at me from the other side? And why Dorothy had never, not once, let me cross that street. Here's something nobody tells you about discovering a secret that big. You don't scream. You don't throw things. You don't fall apart dramatically the way you imagine you would. You go very, very still. Like your whole body needs a moment to catch up to what your eyes just read. I sat on that floor for a long time. Long enough that the light outside the window shifted. Long enough that Gerald made himself a sandwich in the kitchen, ate it, and went back to the garage. I heard all of it and didn't move. Then, slowly, I started to think. The address was real. The names on the certificate were real. And the house across the street, the one I had looked at every day for 12 years, the one Dorothy had steered me away from with 100 different excuses, the one where a woman with my birthmark and my face had watched me grow up from a distance. That house was listed on my adoption paperwork as the last known address of my biological parents. This was not a coincidence. The next morning, I woke up before Gerald and drove to the county records office when it opened at 8. I had the documents with me, folded inside a plain manila envelope. The woman behind the counter was tired and efficient and didn't ask unnecessary questions, which I was grateful for. She pulled the file. Adoption records from that year were partially sealed, she said, but some information was accessible to the adoptee upon request with valid ID. I had my ID. I had the certificate. I had her name on a piece of paper. The file confirmed what the certificate had already told me and added one thing I hadn't known. My biological parents had not voluntarily terminated their parental rights. The record showed a contested removal. There had been a court process. There had been appeals. 2 of them, filed within the first 18 months after the adoption was finalized. Both denied. They had tried to get me back. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the county records office for 40 minutes after that. The engine was off. I watched people walk in and out of the building. Ordinary people with ordinary paperwork, birth certificates and property records, and whatever else people need on a Tuesday morning. I thought about Dorothy's note. We thought it was the right thing. For you most of all. She knew. She had always known that they fought for me. She had known, and she had kept me in that house, 10 minutes from them, across one street, for 12 years. I drove back. I parked outside the house, my childhood home, and looked across at the white shutters and the maple tree. A light was on in the front room. I could see the faint glow of a television behind a curtain. Someone was home. I sat there for 2 hours before I drove away. I told myself I needed more time. I needed to be sure. I needed to think about what I was going to say. But the truth is, I already knew everything I needed to know. I was just terrified of the moment when knowing became doing. Over the next 2 weeks, I kept digging. I found their names in old local newspaper archives, a brief mention in a community piece from years back. A photograph, small and grainy, but clear enough. The woman in the photo had brown hair, a familiar tilt to her head, a familiar way of standing. The man beside her was broad-shouldered, with the kind of quiet, careful expression of someone holding themselves very still in public. I had seen both of them before. Not just the woman. The man, too, occasionally. In the driveway, loading something into a truck, raking leaves. I had filed him under neighbor's husband and never thought twice. I had walked past my own father on the sidewalk. The night I realized that, I couldn't sleep at all. I lay in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling, the same ceiling I had stared at as a 6-year-old, trying to remember my mother's face. And I understood that everything I thought I knew about my own life had been a stage set, carefully built, carefully maintained. And I had been living on it without ever once being allowed to look behind the curtain. I was done not looking. I decided on a Saturday morning. I didn't plan it, or I told myself I didn't, but when I woke up that day, I lay there for exactly 7 minutes, then got up, got dressed, and walked out the front door before I could talk myself out of it. The street was quiet. It was early enough that most people weren't outside yet. Just a dog walker far down the block and the low gray light of a November morning. I stood on the sidewalk in front of our house and looked at the house across the street. Smoke coming faintly from the chimney. A light in the kitchen. A car in the driveway. I crossed the street. Every step felt deliberate in a way that normal steps don't. Like my body knew this was not an ordinary walk across an ordinary road. Like something in my legs understood that once I rang that bell, the version of my life I had been living, the one built on a lie I hadn't even known was a lie, would be over. I rang the bell anyway. I heard movement inside. Footsteps, unhurried, slightly heavy, the footsteps of someone in no particular rush on a quiet Saturday morning. Then a pause, just before the door. The small hesitation of someone checking through the peephole. The door opened. She was smaller than I expected, shorter than me by a few inches, with brown hair going gray at the temples, wearing an old flannel shirt and holding a dish towel in her hands, like she'd been interrupted mid-task. She looked exactly like the woman I had seen in the garden for 20 years. Of course she did. She looked at me, and every bit of color drained out of her face. We stood there, I don't know how long enough that I became aware of the cold air, the distant sound of a car somewhere, the dish towel slipping from her fingers and falling to the porch floor. She didn't pick it up. She couldn't look away from my face. Then she said a name. Not Megan. A different name. Short, soft, 2 syllables. The name on the adoption certificate. My name at birth. The one I had read for the first time 2 weeks ago on a piece of official paper. She said it the way you say something you've been saying quietly to yourself for years, in the dark, when no one can hear. My throat closed. From somewhere behind her, a man's voice. "Karen? Everything okay?" She didn't answer him. She was looking at my wrist. I hadn't even thought about it. I was wearing a short-sleeved shirt, and my arm was right there. She looked at the birthmark on my wrist, then looked at her own wrist, then looked back at my face. Her eyes filled. "Come in," she said. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Please, come in." I stepped inside. The house smelled like coffee and something baking. Warm, lived in, the smell of a home that had been a home for a long time. Photos on the wall of the hallway. I didn't let myself look at them yet. The man appeared in the kitchen doorway, broad-shouldered, the same quiet, careful face from the newspaper photograph. He saw me, and went completely still. We stood in that hallway, the three of us, and nobody said anything for what felt like a very long time. Then the woman, my mother, though I couldn't make myself think the word yet, pressed one hand over her mouth. Her shoulders shook once, and then the tears came. I did not expect to cry. I had told myself on the walk over that I would stay calm, stay controlled, get information, that this was about facts. But standing there, in that hallway, watching this woman who had watched me from 100 yards away for 20 years finally fall apart because I was standing 3 feet in front of her, I didn't manage to stay calm. I'm not sure anyone could have. We sat at the kitchen table, the three of us. She made coffee because she needed something to do with her hands. I understood that completely. He sat across from me and held his wife's hand on top of the table and looked at me with an expression that I can only describe as a man seeing something he had given up believing he would ever see. They talked for a long time. Sometimes one of them, sometimes the other, sometimes both at once and then stopping, apologizing, starting over. I didn't interrupt. I had waited 25 years for this conversation. I could wait a little longer to ask my questions. Here is what they told me. They were 19 years old when I was born, both of them. Young, in love, completely unprepared for what was happening, and too proud and too scared to admit it. He had just lost his job. She had medical bills from a difficult pregnancy that they had no realistic way of paying. They were behind on rent, behind on everything, and a caseworker had been coming to the apartment regularly because a neighbor had filed a noise complaint. A noise complaint, of all things, from a building where the walls were paper thin. The caseworker was not cruel, they said. She was just doing her job. And the job, as she explained it to two 19-year-olds who didn't know their rights and couldn't afford a lawyer, was to make sure children were in stable environments. The apartment was not stable. The finances were not stable. And if they didn't cooperate with finding an alternative placement, the file would go to a judge, and the outcome would be the same, only worse and on record. They signed the papers. She said she held me for 2 hours before they took me. He waited in the hallway because he couldn't be in the room. They had picked out my name, the one on the certificate, the one she had said at the door. They had picked it out months before I was born, sitting on the floor of that apartment, looking at a baby name book they'd found at a yard sale. 6 months later, he found work. Real work, stable income. They got a better apartment, then a small house. They hired a family lawyer, scraped together the money over almost a year, filed to have the adoption reopened. The first appeal was denied on the grounds that the child had been placed in a stable home and disruption would not serve the child's best interests. They filed again. Denied again. The lawyer told them a third attempt would almost certainly fail and would cost them more than they had. They stopped filing. But they didn't stop looking. It took them 3 more years, some connections, some luck, a real estate listing that came across his desk at work. The house across the street from the family who had adopted their daughter came up for sale. They bought it. She looked at me across the table when she said this. She wasn't apologizing for it. She just said it like it was the only logical thing. The only thing that made any sense when nothing else was available to you. We just needed to see you, she said. We needed to know you were okay. That was all we wanted. We weren't going to interfere. We promised each other we wouldn't. I thought about Dorothy, about the tightness in her voice every time I asked about crossing the street, about the way she must have looked out that same kitchen window and understood exactly who those neighbors were. About the note she left me. We thought it was the right thing. For you, most of all. 2 families. 1 street. 20 years of silence. And me, in the middle, drinking coffee at both kitchen tables 20 years apart, learning the shape of the lie I had been living inside. I asked one question before I left that day. I looked at them both, and I asked, "Did you know which window was my bedroom?" She nodded. "The one on the left," she said. "Second floor. You used to leave the light on very late. You were always reading." I had to look away after that. I want to be honest with you about what came next, because if I skip this part and jump straight to healing and forgiveness and sitting around a table together, I'm lying to you. And this whole story is about what lies cost. What came next was anger. Not the clean, righteous kind that movies show you, where someone stands up and delivers the perfect speech and walks out while everyone watches. It wasn't like that. It was the messy, exhausting, nowhere to put it kind. The kind that wakes you up at 3 in the morning and sits on your chest. I was angry at Dorothy. At the woman who had taken me in, given me a roof, given me structure and safety, and also known every single day who lived across that street. Who had looked me in the eye and said, "Your parents are dead," when she knew they were 40 yards away. Who had written me a note that said, "We thought it was the right thing," and then left me to figure out what that meant alone after she was gone, because she didn't have the courage to say it while she was alive. I was angry at my biological parents, at 2 people who had watched me grow up from 100 yards away for 17 years and said nothing, who had made a promise to each other not to interfere, and kept it so completely that their own child never once, not for a single moment, knew they existed. They bought a house across the street. They watched me leave for college. They watched me come back for holidays. And they said nothing. And yes, I was angry at myself for not pushing harder, for accepting the explanations about the street, for closing that browser tab 2 years earlier when the form told me I needed to come in person, for all the times I had looked at that woman in the garden and filed it under coincidence because knowing was too frightening to risk. I stopped returning their calls for 3 weeks. Both sides. I wasn't calling Gerald either. I was staying in my apartment in the city and working and going to the gym and cooking dinner and doing all the ordinary things that people do while something enormous is being processed in some deeper part of them that hasn't caught up yet. My best friend asked me one evening what was going on. I told her the whole thing, start to finish. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the reasons she's my best friend. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "So, what do you want?" Not what should you do. What do you actually want? I thought about it for a long time. I didn't want to pretend none of it had happened. I didn't want to perform forgiveness I didn't feel yet. But I also, and this surprised me, didn't want to walk away. I had spent my whole life feeling like I was in the wrong story, like something was missing that I couldn't name. And now I knew what it was. Walking away from it felt like choosing the lie over the truth. And I had already lived inside enough lies. 3 weeks and 2 days after that first meeting, my phone rang, a number I now recognized. I stared at it through 2 full rings. Then I picked up. Her voice was careful, like someone walking on ice and testing each step before putting weight on it. "I just wanted to ask," she said, "whether you'd be willing to get a cup of coffee sometime." Just that. No pressure, no expectations. Just coffee, if you want. Such a small question. Such an ordinary thing. Coffee. I said yes. The coffee shop was neutral ground. My idea. Somewhere neither of us had history, somewhere neither of us had to be anything other than two people sitting across from each other, trying to figure out what came next. She was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window, hands wrapped around a mug, watching the door. When she saw me come in, something in her face changed. Relaxed, maybe. Like she had been holding her breath since she called and had only just let it out. We talked for 3 hours. I'm not going to tell you it was easy. There were silences that went on too long, and moments when one of us said something that landed wrong and we had to back up and try again. She asked questions she wasn't sure she was allowed to ask. I said things I hadn't planned to say. We talked about the appeals she had filed, and the lawyer and the caseworker, and the apartment where she had held me for 2 hours before they took me. We talked about Dorothy. I told her things about my childhood, not to hurt her, but because she had missed it, and she wanted to know. We talked about Gerald, who was still moving through his grief one quiet day at a time. At some point, she said, "I need you to know that I never stopped thinking about you. Not one day. And I need you to know that I am not asking you to forgive us. I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know that you were thought about every single day." I looked at her across the table, at the familiar shape of her face, the familiar way she held her coffee mug, the birthmark on her wrist resting against the white ceramic. My whole life, I had felt like something was missing. I had never been able to name it exactly. I had just walked around with this quiet, persistent sense of incompleteness that I had eventually just accepted as part of who I was. Sitting there, I understood. This was what had been missing. Not these specific people. I didn't know them yet, not really. But this, the knowledge that I came from somewhere. That there were people in this world who were connected to me by something older and deeper than circumstance. That I had not simply appeared, fully formed, on Dorothy's doorstep with a plastic bag and a one-eyed bear. I came from somewhere. I came from someone. That was the thing I had been missing. We met again the following week, then again after that. Slowly, carefully, without any pretense that we were something we weren't yet. Her husband, my father, another word I was still learning to say, joined us the third time. He was quieter than she was, more careful with his words. He shook my hand when I arrived and held onto it for just a moment longer than a regular handshake. Neither of us commented on it. It's been 2 years now. I won't tell you we're a normal family. We're not, and maybe we never will be. There's too much missing in the middle. Too many years that can't be handed back. I still have complicated feelings about the choices that were made, by everyone involved, including Dorothy, who I also still love in the complicated way you love people who failed you, but also cared for you and are no longer here to talk to about it. But I have something I didn't have 2 years ago. I have people who share my face, who have the same birthmark in the same spot, who named me before I was born and held onto that name for 25 years, who drove past a for sale sign and thought, "That's the house. That's the one." Because it meant being on the same street as their daughter, even if they could never cross it. That kind of love is not nothing. It's not simple, but it is not nothing. I want to say one more thing before I go, and I'm saying it directly to whoever needs to hear it right now. I spent 25 years feeling like I didn't quite belong anywhere, like I was always slightly outside something, close enough to see it, never quite inside. And for a long time, I thought that was just who I was. Some people are like that. Some people just don't fully belong. But what I know now is this. I wasn't outside because that's who I was. I was outside because someone had put me there. And the moment I finally crossed that street, the one I'd been kept away from my whole childhood, everything changed. You don't have to stay on the side of the street someone else assigned you to. Whatever it is in your life, whatever door you've been circling, whatever question you've been too afraid to ask, I'm not telling you it will go smoothly when you finally walk through. I'm not telling you the truth is always comfortable. I'm telling you that living in the dark to protect someone else's secret is not a life. It's just a very elaborate waiting room. Cross the street. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever had to cross a hard street of your own, or if you're still standing on the wrong side of one, tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and if you're watching this alone, late at night, with something weighing on you that you haven't told anyone, I see you. I really do. Thank you for being here with me tonight. Like if this story touched you. Subscribe if you want to hear more.